The bells began before Adelaide Mowbray had crossed the threshold. One moment Keldon Hall stood in grave Yorkshire silence, all pale stone, high windows, and the weight of generations. The next, somewhere beyond the servants' entrance, metal clattered against metal with such violence that the hired carriage horse shied. Adelaide tightened her grip on the worn handle of her trunk. The sound came again. Not one bell, many. They rang over one another in a frenzy, sharp and insistent, as if every room in the great house had discovered an emergency at once. She glanced at the cuff she had mended during the final mile. Her mother's cherrywood needle case rested inside her reticule, its carved swallow polished pale by years of use. Small repairs first, her mother had always said. Attend to the fray before it becomes a tear no one can hide. Adelaide drew one steady breath and stepped inside. The servants' passage was already in confusion. A housemaid stood beneath the bellboard with both hands over her ears. A footman had abandoned a silver tray and was staring upward as 4 ivory pointers jumped behind their painted labels. Bedchamber, library, blue drawing room, west nursery. They're empty, whispered a young maid. All of them? Don't say that, another hissed. Not the nursery. A man in sober black livery turned sharply. He was near 60, straight-backed and silver-haired. Stand away from the passage, he ordered. Mr. Vale, take the lower stairs. Thomas, see whether any room pull has caught. No one moved. The bells rang harder. Adelaide saw fear pass through the servants faster than command. It was not ordinary alarm. This was remembered dread, fed by repetition, and never corrected. She set down her trunk. Which rooms are occupied? She asked. The silver-haired man looked at her. Madam, the library? No. The blue drawing room? No. The west nursery? The pause answered before he did. Locked for 12 years. A pair of maids crossed themselves. Adelaide looked past them to the bellboard. Something behind the frame shuddered each time the pointers struck. Then no one runs blindly, she said. You will answer only the calls, mister, Hollis confirms. One servant at a time, no crowding the stair. The man in black narrowed his eyes. You know my name? Your letter named you as butler. She inclined her head. I am Miss Adelaide Mowbray. Recognition flickered across his face. Before he could reply, 2 maids rushed from the kitchen passage at once. One carried a covered soup tureen. The other tried to avoid her, caught a heel on the stair runner, and lurched sideways. The tureen tipped. A scullery girl below looked up, frozen beneath its fall. Adelaide moved before anyone cried out. Stop! The word cut through the bells. The maid holding the tureen locked her elbows. Adelaide caught the second maid by the forearm, steadied her, then pointed toward the wall. Back against the paneling. Both of you. She turned to the scullery girl. You, 2 steps down. Now. The girl obeyed. A stream of broth escaped beneath the lid, but the vessel remained upright. Mr. Hollis, place 1 footman at each landing. No one moves until the passage is clear. This time the servants moved. 1 footman took the lower turn. Another guided the maids aside. The scullery girl pressed herself to the wall, wide-eyed but unhurt. Adelaide looked up again. Behind the board, nearly hidden by the frame, a blackened brass crank trembled against its bracket. It did not resemble an ordinary room pull. Its surface had darkened to match the wood, yet the movement was too direct and too strong. Has that always been there? She asked, mister. Hollis followed her gaze. So I have been told. By whom? Mr. Crewe. A broad man in a brown coat emerged from the rear corridor. He had heavy lids, careful whiskers, and the air of someone offended by disorder only when others noticed it. What is this uproar? He demanded. The bells, sir. said Hollis. "I can hear the bells." Mr. Crewe's attention settled on Adelaide. "And who is this?" "Miss Mowbray," Hollis replied. "The temporary acting housekeeper." Temporary. The word passed quietly through the servants. Mr. Crewe glanced at the crank. An old, redundant fitting. These houses collect useless mechanisms the way old men collect grievances. Adelaide crouched enough to see its edge. The third tooth had been filed flat, not broken. Filed, redundant things seldom move with purpose, she said. Mr. Crewe's expression hardened. "You have arrived less than 5 minutes, madam. Long enough to see that the room pulls are not moving in time with those pointers." The bells gave one final shudder. Then they stopped. Silence fell so quickly that Adelaide could hear soup dripping onto the stone floor. From the doorway at the end of the passage came a man's voice. "Is this the new housekeeper?" Every servant straightened. Leopold Calthorpe, the 6th Duke of Keldon, stood beneath the arch in dark riding clothes touched with dust from the road. He was taller than Adelaide had expected, broad-shouldered and controlled, with the severe composure of a man who disliked finding his own house beyond command. His eyes moved from Hollis to the bellboard, then to Adelaide. They were not unkind eyes. They were doubtful. "Yes, Your Grace," Hollis said. "Miss Adelaide Mowbray." The Duke studied her mended cuff, plain bonnet, and waiting trunk. His mouth bent with dry resignation. "She won't last a month here." He said it to Hollis. He did not say it loudly. The passage, however, was silent enough for every word to carry. Adelaide felt the sentence settle through the servants around her. Some looked away. Mr. Crewe did not. A woman was easier to manage after authority had predicted her failure. Adelaide rose and met the Duke's gaze, but she did not answer the insult. The scullery girl still stood pale against the wall. The passage remained blocked. The crank had stopped moving only because whoever had set it in motion had chose to stop. Pride could wait. Safety could not. "Mr. Hollis," Adelaide said, "the lower stair first, then the upper passage. We count every servant and verify every occupied room before we answer another bell." The Duke's brows lifted. "You intend to give orders already." "Only until no one can be injured by confusion, Your Grace." Something changed in his expression. Not trust. Attention. He looked at the maid whose hands still shook around the tureen, then at Nell Dyer below her, and finally at the blackened crank. "Do as Miss Mowbray says," he ordered. "Until the bells are made safe, her word governs the passage." Mr. Crewe opened his mouth. The Duke did not look at him. "That includes you, Crewe." The servants moved in careful sequence. Hollis assigned the landings. The tureen went to the kitchen. Nell Dyer reached the floor unharmed. Adelaide returned to the bellboard only after the passage was clear. She did not touch the crank. Evidence handled too soon became an excuse for someone else to call it disturbed. She fixed the flat third tooth in her memory instead. Beyond the service walls, Keldon Hall stood immense and outwardly composed. Inside, its empty rooms had rung for help. That night, long after the household had settled, and Adelaide had placed her needle case beside the narrow bed in her assigned chamber, one bell sounded through the darkness. A single note. Adelaide rose at once. In the corridor, no footsteps followed. No servant answered. Downstairs, behind the silent board, the ivory pointer beneath the words "West Nursery" trembled once and came to rest. By 7 the following morning, Adelaide had already learned 3 things about Keldon Hall. The first was that no servant would speak of the West Nursery above a whisper. The second was that Mr. Crewe preferred every question to arrive through him and every answer to remain incomplete. The third was that Mr. Hollis, though cautious, disliked disorder more than he disliked a woman who noticed it. The single bell in the night had brought no footsteps to Adelaide's door. When she reached the service passage before breakfast, she found the ivory pointer beneath West Nursery, resting perfectly still. No cord had been reported pulled. No window in the locked wing had been found open. Mr. Crewe called the incident settling metal. Adelaide did not argue. She asked for paper instead. By 8:30, a long sheet lay across the household table, weighted at each corner by salt cellars. Adelaide had drawn the bellboard in a neat hand, then marked the rooms in columns. Mr. Hollis stood beside her while footmen moved through the house and pulled each cord in turn. "Library," called a voice from above. One pointer jumped. Adelaide marked the response. "Blue drawing room." A second pointer moved cleanly. "Duke's dressing room." The proper bell sounded, but the West Nursery pointer trembled with it. Hollis saw the motion. His mouth tightened. "That is not settling metal." "No," Adelaide said, "it is connection." Mr. Crewe, who had entered without announcement, removed his gloves finger by finger. "It is age. The wires cross. The walls shift." These systems were never designed to survive generations of repair. Then, the pattern should be irregular. Adelaide replied, "This is not. You speak with confidence for someone who has never managed a house of this size." "I speak with confidence because the same two pointers move together." Crewe gave a soft laugh. "A lodging house in Portsmouth is not Keldon Hall." Adelaide placed another mark beside West Nursery. "No, in a lodging house, a wrong bell brings down one tired traveller. Here it may send 12 frightened servants running toward an empty room." Hollis looked away, but not before she saw approval in his expression. Crewe saw it too. "The board cannot be mapped," he said. "Not accurately. Then we shall discover where accuracy ends." Adelaide sent Thomas to the bedchambers, another footman to the east corridor, and a maid to pull the morning room cord under Hollis's supervision. Each response went onto the sheet. The work was slow, but fear lost some of its power when reduced to ink and sequence. By 10, even Nell Dyer had stopped glancing toward the locked wing whenever a bell moved. The library pointer worked loose during the final test. Its small ivory label slipped from the frame and fell between Adelaide and a man who had entered the passage so quietly that only the sudden straightening of the servants announced him. Leopold reached for it at the same moment she did. Their fingers closed around the label together. The contact lasted no more than a breath. His hand was warm, hers cool from the stone passage, both released at once. The ivory piece dropped into his palm. "Library," he read. Adelaide drew back her hand. "It has loosened at the pin, Your Grace, so I see." His gaze moved to the ink stain on her forefinger, then to the narrow seam she had mended at her cuff. Neither detail should have mattered to a duke. Yet he looked at them as though they contradicted something he had expected. "Have you found the ghost?" he asked. His tone was dry, but not mocking. "No, Your Grace." Adelaide returned to her plan. Only a system that behaves as though someone wishes it to be mistaken for one. A stillness passed through the corridor. Crewe cleared his throat. "Miss Mowbray has an affection for conclusions." "I have an affection for repeated facts," she said. Leopold's mouth almost changed shape. Almost. He handed the ivory label to Hollis. "Have it fixed where it belongs." Then he looked at Adelaide. "Continue." The single word carried enough authority to silence Crewe. Before Adelaide could answer, wheels sounded in the forecourt. A carriage door opened. Within minutes, the lower hall filled with the rustle of travelling silk. and the precise disturbance created by a woman, accustomed to arriving before anyone had prepared to resist her. Lady Emmeline Kynaston entered the blue drawing-room just before noon in a pearl-coloured pelisse, her dark hair arranged without a strand misplaced. She was beautiful in the polished way of a portrait commissioned to flatter a family. A maid followed with a jewel case. 2 footmen carried boxes. Lady Emmeline looked first at the furniture, then at the flowers, and finally at Adelaide, as though assessing which object had been set in the wrong position. "So this is the latest experiment," she said. Hollis inclined his head. "Miss Mowbray, my lady. His Grace's acting housekeeper." "Acting," Emmeline repeated. How reassuringly temporary. Adelaide curtsied. "Lady Emmeline, you may stand behind the tea-table. I shall review the household arrangements while I take refreshment. The tea will be brought at once." Adelaide turned toward the door. "I did not ask you to send someone else." Emmeline removed one glove. "I asked you to stand there." The room held Hollis, 2 footmen, Emmeline's maid, and Mrs. Preece, the senior housemaid. Every face had acquired the careful blankness of servants witnessing a battle they could not acknowledge. Adelaide kept her voice even. "I will ensure that your ladyship is properly served. I will not perform submission for the room." Emmeline's brows rose. "You mistake service for humiliation." "No, my lady, I recognize the difference." For one second, Emmeline's composure thinned. Then she crossed to the bell-pull beside the fireplace and tugged it 3 times, though Adelaide stood less than 6 feet away. The sharp ringing sounded below, once, twice, 3 times. "There," Emmeline said. "Now perhaps someone will remember how this house is governed." "It is governed by His Grace," Leopold said from the doorway. No one had heard him approach. Emmeline turned, and her smile appeared instantly. "Leopold, I had begun to think Keldon had abandoned all ceremony. Keldon has abandoned nothing." He entered the room. His gaze went to the bell-pull, still moving in Emmeline's hand, then to Adelaide. "Miss Mowbray holds my domestic appointment." Emmeline let the cord fall. "I merely wished for tea. You may request tea." His voice remained quiet. "You may not countermand my household officers or use my bells to make sport of them." A faint colour entered Emmeline's face. "Surely you are not choosing a temporary employee over a guest." "I am choosing order over vanity." The words landed cleanly. Emmeline's maid lowered her eyes. One of the footmen became deeply interested in the carpet. Adelaide felt no triumph. Public protection could easily become another form of display if she allowed herself to stand beneath it as though rescued. "The tea will be served in 5 minutes," she said. "Mrs. Preece has already prepared the tray." Leopold looked at her then. Not past her, at her, he had defended her authority, but she had preserved it herself. Something like recognition entered his expression. Emmeline saw that recognition and disliked it at once. "Very efficient," she said. "Let us hope efficiency proves enough." Adelaide met her gaze. "It usually proves more durable than intimidation, my lady." Hollis coughed into one hand. Leopold looked toward the window, but the corner of his mouth moved, only slightly. By afternoon, Lady Emmeline had sent 6 separate instructions through servants who did not belong to her personal staff. Adelaide returned each one with the same answer. Requests would be honoured. Orders would pass through the proper household officer. The resistance was quiet, but it altered the air. At dusk, Hollis brought the repaired ivory library label to the household office. His Grace said you were to have the board completed before any further work is done. "And Mr. Crewe?" Adelaide asked. Displeased, Hollis placed the label beside her plan. Lady Emmeline, more so. He paused. You should know that she has managed portions of Keldon during his Grace's absences. Managed them well? Hollis considered the question. She managed them visibly. Before Adelaide could ask more, a bell began ringing somewhere above them. Not the West Nursery this time. The note was harsher and continuous. Hollis went still. The colour left his face. The West Wing fire bell, he said. Then smoke slipped beneath the service door. Sewer, smoke rolled beneath the service door in a thin grey ribbon, and every servant in the passage stopped breathing as though the house itself had spoken. The West Wing fire bell hammered overhead without pause. Hollis reached for the latch, but Adelaide caught his sleeve before he opened it. Not yet. We don't know what is beyond it. He looked at her once, then nodded. Thomas, she said, turning to the nearest footman, take a lantern and count every person assigned to the West Passage. Mr. Hollis, send one man to the courtyard pump and another to the stable yard. Mrs. Preece, keep the younger maids below. No one runs upstairs alone. The orders moved through the corridor faster than fear because each named a task. Lady Emmeline appeared at the far end of the hall in a silk evening wrapper beneath a dark shawl, her maid close behind. What is happening? She demanded. Smoke in the West Service Gallery. Adelaide answered. Then ring for Crewe. The bell is already doing enough. Emmeline's expression sharpened, but a second curl of smoke entered beneath the door. Adelaide wrapped a folded cloth over her mouth, lifted the latch, and opened the door only a hand's breadth. Warm smoke pressed through, not hot enough for an open blaze, but thick enough to blind. The nearest rooms? She asked Hollis. An unused linen room, the old schoolroom, and 2 chambers where Mr. Crewe's workmen have been lodged. Are the men inside? Hollis's face changed. They retired early after repairing the west chimney breast. Adelaide opened the door wider. Then we bring them out before we search for flames. You are not going in there, Lady Emmeline said. I am the person who knows which servants have been counted. Adelaide replied. Mr. Hollis knows the passage. We go together. A voice behind them cut through the argument, and so do I. Leopold stood at the turn of the corridor, his coat unfastened and his cravat loosened as if he had left the dining room without waiting for a servant. His gaze took in the smoke, the bell, and the servants gathering buckets. Where is Crewe? Not yet found, Your Grace, Hollis said. Adelaide gave Leopold the facts without ornament. 2 workmen may be asleep beyond the gallery. We have smoke, but no confirmed flame. The younger servants are being kept below. He did not countermand her. What do you require? The question startled the room more than any order could have done. Adelaide pointed toward the heavy doors dividing the West Passage. Keep those closed behind us, so the smoke does not spread. Have the stable men bring wet blankets. No one breaks a window unless we find fire. The draught may feed it. Leopold turned to the staff. You heard Miss Mowbray. Until every person is accounted for, she commands this house. The words drove the last hesitation from the corridor. Hollis took 1 lantern. Leopold took another. Adelaide led them through the door. Smoke turned the gallery into a narrow tunnel of shadow. They moved with one hand against the wall, calling the workmen's names. The old schoolroom stood empty. The first lodging chamber was empty too, its bed untouched. At the second end, the latch would not lift. Hollis put his shoulder to it, but the swollen wood held. A faint cough came from within. Stand back, Leopold said. He struck the door beside the latch with the heel of his boot. Once, twice. The frame gave enough for Hollis to force it open. 2 men lay on narrow beds, disoriented but conscious. Adelaide crossed to the nearer one, drew him upright, and pressed a damp cloth into his hands. "Cover your mouth. Follow the Duke's lantern. Do not hurry." Leopold supported the second man without ceremony, taking his weight beneath one arm. They returned along the wall, while Hollis called ahead for the doors to be opened. No one cheered when they emerged. The servants simply moved as Adelaide had directed. Mrs. Preece guided the workmen toward fresh air. Thomas counted them aloud. All present, Miss Mowbray. Only then did Adelaide allow herself to cough. The sound scraped through her chest, brief but sharp. Leopold looked toward her, but she was already turning back to the passage. "We still need the source." The smoke proved to be coming from a flue that served an old gallery fireplace. No flame had escaped into the room. A damper had been forced shut while a small maintenance fire burned below, driving smoke sideways through a cracked inspection panel. One of the stable men opened the outer vent under Hollis's direction. The air began to clear. Mr. Crewe arrived as the last bucket was set down. His hair was neatly combed, though he claimed he had been roused from sleep. "A neglected flue," he said after one glance. "Exactly as I warned." Adelaide stood beside the fireplace, her eyes watering from smoke. Who ordered a maintenance fire after dusk? One of the workmen, no doubt. The two men seated near the courtyard door both shook their heads. "We left it cold, sir," the elder said. Crewe's jaw tightened. Then soot settled against the damper. Hollis held up the iron handle. A fresh wedge mark scored its edge. "Soot does not do that," Adelaide said. Crewe looked at her as if the smoke were her invention. "Nor does a woman with 3 days' experience understand old flues." "This is my second day," she said, "which makes the mark no less fresh." Leopold's gaze shifted from the handle to Crewe. "No repairs begin until morning. The fireplace is to remain guarded." Crewe bowed stiffly. "As your grace commands." When the gallery had been secured, Adelaide returned to the service passage. The bell had finally fallen silent. Behind the board, the blackened brass crank rested 1 notch lower than it had that morning. She did not touch it. "Mr. Hollis," she said, "will you confirm its position?" He leaned close. "You are correct. It has moved." Crewe had followed them. Metal expands with heat. Adelaide turned toward him. "The smoke never reached this passage, and the board is cold. Vibration, then. From a fire bell connected to a different line?" The question held him for half a second too long. Adelaide reached past the frame only far enough to examine the bracket without disturbing it. A rough edge caught her palm. She drew back at once. A narrow scrape crossed the skin, bright against the soot. Leopold stepped nearer, then stopped before touching her. "May I see?" "It is shallow, Your Grace. That was not my question." Adelaide opened her hand. He studied the scrape without taking it, then looked toward Mrs. Preece. Clean water and linen. A draught moved through the passage. Only then did Adelaide realize how cold the smoke-damp fabric at her shoulders had become. Leopold removed his coat. "May I?" he asked. His restraint mattered more than the garment. Adelaide met his eyes. "Yes, thank you." He placed the coat around her shoulders, careful not to brush her injured palm. The weight of it was warm and unexpectedly steady. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Mr. Crewe broke the silence by setting a folded paper on the household table. The entire bell system must be replaced. "I prepared an estimate when the first irregularities were reported." Adelaide glanced at the date written beneath his signature. 19th April, 2 days before the fire bell had rung. She lifted her eyes to his. "You priced the cure," she said quietly, "before tonight's danger existed. The date on Mr. Crewe's estimate did not change when the smoke cleared. 19th April remained written beneath his signature, 2 days before the false fire bell, and Adelaide looked at it each morning for the next week, while the paper rested in the locked household drawer under Mr. Hollis's key. She did not accuse him. Accusations invited denial. Procedures made denial work harder. By the end of April, no repairman entered a service passage without a servant witness. Every bell call was tested in daylight. Every meal order was written once, read aloud, and placed on a slate where no private hand could alter it. Mrs. Preece took charge of the upper linen rooms. Mr. Hollis retained command of the male indoor servants. Adelaide coordinated the movement between them, which meant no footman could be summoned away from dinner service by Lady Emmeline's personal note, and no housemaid could be blamed for answering a bell that had never been pulled. The west wing remained closed while the damaged damper was examined. The 2 workmen recovered after a day of rest and fresh air. Adelaide's scraped palm stayed tender beneath clean linen for several days. But by the first week of May, she could write without discomfort. The Duke's coat, brushed free of soot, had been returned through Mrs. Preece the morning after the incident. Adelaide had not seen Leopold receive it. She only knew that when he appeared at the daily household conference, he wore another coat and asked for the workmen by name. That question travelled farther through the servants' hall than any public praise could have done. Fear did not vanish from Keldon Hall. It retreated by degrees. A bell rang at midnight, and Thomas checked the room instead of waking the entire passage. Lady Emmeline sent a folded instruction changing breakfast from 9 to 8, and Adelaide returned it with a courteous note that guest preferences would be accommodated after confirmation from the Duke. Mr. Crewe complained that witnesses delayed his men. Adelaide answered that repeated repairs had delayed the household for months. Each exchange was small. Together, they changed the current of the house. By mid-May, servants came to the household office with facts rather than apologies. Nell Dyer reported a cracked kitchen flagstone before anyone fell on it. A footman admitted that the blue drawing-room bell sometimes moved when the Duke's dressing-room cord was pulled. Mrs. Preece asked for an additional maid during the summer reception instead of silently stretching the existing staff beyond reason. Adelaide approved what she could and sent larger matters to Leopold with costs and consequences set out in plain language. He did not always agree. He always answered. That alone distinguished him from men who called indecision dignity. The difficulty lay in Lady Emmeline. She had spent years issuing instructions during Leopold's absences, and she treated every restored boundary as a personal insult. She changed flowers after Adelaide approved them, moved guests from prepared chambers, and once sent a footman to fetch a shawl from an empty room, simply to test whether the household would obey her. The footman brought the request to Adelaide instead. Her ladyship says it's urgent. Is she cold? Adelaide asked. She's sitting beside the fire. Then she may wait until you've finished carrying the wine. The footman's mouth twitched. Yes, Miss Mowbray. On the 3rd of June, Keldon Hall received 24 dinner guests for the first formal gathering of the summer. Lady Emmeline altered 3 place cards less than an hour before dinner, placing an elderly baronet beside a woman with whom he had not spoken in 6 years and moving a bishop's sister below a newly married viscountess. The change was not merely rude. It was designed to fail visibly. Adelaide found the cards while checking the dining room. She did not restore the original arrangement. because the guests had already seen the revised positions during the reception. Instead, she changed the order of entrance, shifted two married couples, and used the Duke's widowed aunt as the social hinge between the offended parties. Mr. Hollis adjusted the footmen's stations without confusion. Mrs. Preece moved one lady's shawl before the procession began. Dinner started 4 minutes late. No one noticed why. Halfway through the second course, the West Nursery pointer trembled behind the service wall. No servant ran. Thomas marked the movement on the slate and continued carrying claret. Adelaide saw the change from the passage and felt something inside her settle. The house had not become obedient. It had become capable of judgment. After the last carriage rolled away, she returned to the household office and found a tray waiting on the corner of her desk. There were 2 cups. Leopold stood near the open door, one shoulder against the frame, his formal coat exchanged for a darker, simpler one. "Mrs. Preece said you hadn't taken tea," he said. "Mrs. Preece has developed alarming influence. I've noticed." He poured without asking. A thin slice of lemon floated in her cup. There was no sugar. Adelaide looked at it, then at him. "You remembered. You leave the sugar untouched every morning." "That suggests observation, Your Grace. It doesn't yet prove memory." "Must everything be entered as evidence?" "Only the things that may later be denied." His mouth curved. It was not the restrained, almost smile she had seen before. This one reached his eyes. Adelaide felt the answering laugh escape before she could examine it. The sound surprised both of them. Leopold set down the teapot. "You rescued my dinner." "Mr. Hollis rescued the service." "Your aunt rescued the seating." "I merely prevented Lady Emmeline from seating 2 old enemies within reach of the same decanter." "You have an unromantic view of triumph. Triumph is usually several competent people avoiding disaster at the same time." His amusement faded into something quieter. Beyond the open door, servants crossed the passage with lowered voices. No bell rang. "I've spent years feeling like a guest here," he said. "At Keldon, especially at Keldon." He looked toward the silent board at the far end of the corridor. "My mother used those bells as judgment. A servant summoned once had been noticed. A servant summoned twice had failed. Sometimes she rang a 3rd time only to see who would be blamed for the delay." Adelaide held her cup between both hands. "How old were you?" "Old enough to understand that every bell meant someone would suffer. Too young to stop it." The confession was offered without drama, which made it heavier. Adelaide did not soften it with easy reassurance. Then silence must have seemed merciful. It still does. "Silence can be fear as well," she said. "People stop answering when they believe the truth will cost them more than the mistake." Leopold studied her. "And what does a house sound like when it's no longer afraid?" "Not silent." She glanced toward the passage, where Hollis was correcting a young footman in a voice too low to humiliate him. "Orderly, honest, occasionally inconvenient. You make home sound like an administrative burden. One can't govern a great house by hiding from its walls." Leopold laughed then, low and unguarded. Adelaide smiled into her tea. For a brief moment, they were not duke and housekeeper, protector and employee, or 2 wary people measuring each word. They were simply a man who had feared his own home and a woman who understood why. The moment ended when Mr. Hollis appeared at the door with the evening slate. Adelaide took it and reviewed the final notations. Behind the bellboard, new wood dust lay beneath the blackened master crank bracket. She crossed the passage, opened her mother's cherrywood needle case, and pressed one fine needle beside the nearest screw. A pale curl lifted from the darkened wood. The bracket looked ancient. The timber beneath it was new. The pale curl of wood remained caught on Adelaide's needle until Mr. Hollis returned with a lamp and a face set in lines of professional concern. He bent beside the bell-board without touching the bracket. That timber was not exposed when I checked it last winter. Adelaide slid the needle back into the cherrywood case. Then we should not let anyone alter it before there are witnesses. By 9, the following morning, the service passage held a small and carefully chosen company. Mr. Hollis stood at Adelaide's right. Mr. Finch, the estate carpenter, knelt beneath the board with his tools still closed. Leopold watched from several feet away. Mr. Crewe arrived last and looked displeased to find the inspection begun without him. "I am Clerk of Works," he said. "No one disputes your title," Adelaide replied. "We are establishing what work was done, when it was done, and under whose direction." Crewe glanced at Leopold. "Your Grace, this is an extraordinary degree of ceremony over a loose bracket." After smoke entered a sleeping passage, ceremony seems inexpensive, Leopold said. Finch examined the screw heads first. He used the back of one fingernail, then a folded scrap of clean linen, taking care not to disturb more than necessary. "Fresh scoring," he said. "The screws have been driven recently." "How recently?" Adelaide asked. "Months, perhaps, not years." He looked at the surrounding wood. "These holes were not made when the board was first hung. The grain has not darkened." Crewe folded his arms. "The bracket may have been secured before my appointment." Hollis turned his head. "You supervised the West Service repairs last November." A short silence followed. Crewe's expression did not change, but his right thumb pressed against the seam of his glove. "I supervised masonry and flue work. I did not personally examine every screw used by every labourer." "Who ordered the work behind this board?" Adelaide asked. "I would need the old accounts. You said yesterday the fitting was ancient and redundant." "That was my understanding." Adelaide looked at Finch. "Can the surface be examined without removing the crank?" "A small patch, perhaps." Leopold stepped forward. "Nothing is to be taken apart until Mr. Latham is present or sends written instruction." Crewe's jaw tightened. "A solicitor is hardly necessary for household maintenance." "Neither was a false fire bell," Leopold said. "Finch used a narrow wooden scraper to lift a flake of black compound from the crank's lower edge. Beneath it, the brass was bright. Another careful stroke revealed the corner of a stamped mark, not enough to read, enough to prove that someone had covered it. Adelaide felt a tension sharpen around her. "That is not soot," Finch said. "It is blacking." "To prevent tarnish," Crewe replied quickly. "Or recognition," Adelaide said. Crewe gave her a thin smile. "You are very skilled at making uncertainty sound sinister, Miss Mowbray." "No, I am skilled at leaving uncertainty where it belongs." She moved to the household table and opened a fresh sheet of paper. In plain language, she recorded the date, the persons present, the fresh screw holes, the blackened brass, and the partly concealed stamp. She did not name a culprit. When the account was complete, she read it aloud. Finch signed first. Hollis followed. Leopold added his name beneath theirs. Crewe hesitated. "My signature may be taken as agreement with her interpretation." "There is no interpretation in the memorandum," Leopold said. "Only what was observed." Crewe signed. Adelaide sanded the ink and folded the paper once. "Mr. Hollis, will you keep this with the repair estimate? Under my key." "This is becoming theatrical," Lady Emmeline said from the passage. She wore pale blue and carried a basket of unopened correspondence as if the entire inspection had delayed a more important world. Her gaze settled on Adelaide. One might almost think Keldon had employed an actress rather than a housekeeper. An actress requires an audience, Adelaide said. I would prefer accurate repairs. Emmeline smiled toward Finch. You may go. Miss Mowbray has had her triumph. Finch looked to Hollis, not to her. You may return to your work, Hollis said. The carpenter bowed and left. It was a small reversal, but Emmeline felt it. Her fingers tightened around the basket handle. You have taught them very quickly where to look for permission. No, my lady, I have reminded them where it already belonged. Emmeline's eyes moved to Leopold. And you indulge this. I require it, he answered. No part of the bell system is to be removed, repaired, painted, or replaced without Hollis present and written notice delivered to Miss Mowbray. Crewe bowed, though resentment showed in the stiffness of his shoulders. Emmeline did not bow at all. She turned away with the smooth dignity of a woman who intended to punish someone later. By the end of that day, the first whisper had reached the upper servants' rooms. Miss Mowbray was inventing defects to increase her importance. By the next morning, the rumour had acquired polish. She had come to Keldon already, knowing the bells were faulty. By evening, Lady Emmeline was telling a visiting neighbour that some women created disorder because order made them necessary. Adelaide heard the last version from Mrs. Preece, who repeated it with visible reluctance. Do you wish me to deny it below stairs? No, Adelaide said. Ask the servants whether their work has become easier or harder. Let the answer travel without my help. Mrs. Preece's shoulders eased. Yes, Miss Mowbray. Adelaide returned to the household office after supper and found the room empty except for the lamp and her mother's needle case, which she had left beside the memorandum while checking stores. The case lay open. One needle remained on the blotting paper, where she had placed it after the inspection. Leopold stood near the desk, holding the wooden lid between two fingers. He did not touch the needle. Mrs. Preece said, "This was yours. It was my mother's." He turned it enough for the lamplight to catch the carved swallow. It is finely made. It was never valuable. That was not what I said. Adelaide stopped on the opposite side of the desk. The room door remained open to the passage. Hollis's footsteps could be heard at intervals beyond it. She carried it everywhere, Adelaide said. When a cuff frayed, when a hem loosened, when a child tore a pocket. She believed small damage deserved attention before it became public ruin. Leopold looked at the case again. You inherited her patience. I inherited the work. That is not the same thing. The quiet certainty in his voice unsettled her more than praise would have done. He set the lid back into place and closed the case carefully. May I? He asked. Adelaide understood that he meant to return it to her hand. The question was unnecessary by custom and necessary by respect. She opened her palm. Yes, he placed the cherrywood case against her skin. Then, slowly enough for refusal, he folded her fingers around it. His hand remained over hers for one measured moment. No accident explained the touch. No emergency required it. Adelaide did not pull away. Their eyes met across the narrow space between them, and the silence felt unlike the fearful quiet of Keldon Hall. It asked nothing. It simply allowed truth to remain. Leopold released her first. I no longer believe you are temporary, he said. Adelaide looked down at the swallow hidden beneath her fingers. Being indispensable is not the same as belonging, Your Grace. He absorbed the words without defense. No, he said, I suppose it is not. Somewhere beyond the open door, a servant crossed the passage, and the moment loosened. Adelaide placed the needle-case safely inside her reticule. On the household table, the memorandum waited beneath Hollis's key. Behind the bell-board, fresh wood surrounded old blacking, and for the first time, someone besides Adelaide understood that usefulness could become another kind of cage. Sewer. The first warning appeared beneath a folded napkin in the lower servants' hall 3 mornings after the inspection of the bellboard. It was a narrow strip of cheap paper, unsigned and unsealed, with 6 words written in a cramped hand. Speak for her and lose your character. The second was found in the pocket of a junior footman's coat before noon. Neither servant wished to bring the notices forward. Mrs. Priest did. She laid both slips on Adelaide's desk and closed the office door only halfway, leaving the passage visible beyond it. They're frightened, Miss Mowbray. Not of dismissal today, of what will be written when they seek another place. Adelaide understood. A servant's character could determine whether a family ate through winter. A threat did not need violence when reputation could close every respectable door in England. Ask them to come together, she said, and tell them they will not be questioned before Mr. Crewe. The 2 servants arrived after breakfast. One was Thomas, the footman who had helped clear the West Passage during the smoke. The other was Clara Webb, an under-housemaid with reddened eyes and hands clenched in her apron. Thomas spoke first. The empty room bells have rung for months, miss. Not every night. Enough that we knew not to answer alone. Who told you not to speak? Adelaide asked. Clara looked toward the passage. No one said it plain at first. We were told mistakes followed those who made trouble. Then, Mary Sloane mentioned the West Nursery last autumn. And her character said she was fanciful and unreliable. She never found another place nearby. Did either of you see who operated the bells? Both shook their heads. Thomas swallowed. I once heard movement above the blue drawing room after midnight. Mr. Crewe said there was no passage there. Adelaide did not promise safety she lacked the authority to guarantee. You have told the truth in good faith. I will place these notices before His Grace and ask for written protection. Until that protection is given, neither of you will be required to repeat this account to anyone else. Clara's grip loosened slightly. You believe us. I believe that fear has been doing work in this house, and someone has benefited from it. Leopold read the notices in the open morning room an hour later. Hollis stood near the door. Thomas and Clara remained below stairs, exactly as Adelaide had promised. The Duke's face changed very little, but his voice lost all trace of dry amusement. A written assurance will be issued today. Any servant who gives truthful evidence concerning the bells will retain wages, lodging, and an honest character, whether the evidence proves convenient or not. It must apply even if their account reflects badly on a senior officer, Adelaide said, especially then. He took up a sheet of paper and wrote the instruction himself. Before the ink had dried, Lady Emmeline entered without waiting to be announced. Her gaze moved from the notices to Adelaide. What fresh court is being assembled now? Leopold did not look up. No court. Then why are servants being encouraged to accuse their betters? Adelaide answered before he could. They are being allowed to speak without losing their livelihood. Emmeline gave a soft, incredulous laugh. That is a dangerous indulgence. Once servants learn that complaints earn ducal attention, loyalty becomes impossible. Silence purchased by livelihood is not loyalty, my lady. Emmeline's expression cooled. You have made yourself remarkably certain of your moral authority. No, I am certain only that fear should not be entered in the wages book as obedience. Leopold sanded the page, folded it, and handed it to Hollis. Have copies read in the servants' hall and posted in the household office. Emmeline turned toward him. You cannot mean to reward insolence. I mean to discover why my house rings for empty rooms. He met her eyes. If that troubles you, I suggest you consider why. She left without another word, but the air remained sharpened after her departure. By afternoon, Adelaide had the witnesses she needed to examine the upper route. The narrow stair to the bell gallery rose behind a concealed service door near the west linen passage. Hollis went first with a lantern. Adelaide followed, then Leopold, with Thomas behind them, carrying a second light. Crewe came last, protesting that the loft held nothing but old wire, dust, and hazards unfit for a lady. Then your presence should make it perfectly safe, Adelaide said. The stair ended beneath the slope of the roof. Timber beams crossed overhead. Bell wires ran through porcelain guides and vanished into dark channels above the ceilings. The air smelled of dry wood, metal, and old plaster. Hollis lifted the lantern toward a line that should have led only to the west nursery. Halfway along the beam, a newer wire joined it and continued toward a squat iron lever fixed behind a support post. From there, 5 additional lines spread in different directions. Adelaide crouched without touching them. One pull could move several pointers. Crewe stepped closer, an architectural experiment. Great houses tried all manner of conveniences before settling upon sensible arrangements. When was it installed? Leopold asked. Before my tenure, I should think. Hollis looked back at him. This guide is fixed with the same bright screws as the bracket below. Crewe's mouth tightened. Old stores may contain unused hardware. Adelaide raised her lantern. On the lever's edge, a shallow groove repeated at regular intervals. The lantern flame fluttered as a draft moved through the roof space. There is scoring here, she said. Bring the light nearer. Thomas shifted his foot. Behind them, the small hatch slammed shut. Both lanterns went out. Darkness swallowed the gallery. Clara's warning, the night bell, and 12 years of whispers seemed to gather in the blackness. But Adelaide forced herself to remain still. A startled movement on the narrow boards could send someone through the plaster ceiling below. No one move, she said. Thomas, stay where you are. Mr. Hollis, can you reach the tinderbox? Yes, miss, but I must set down the lamp. Wood creaked somewhere to Adelaide's left. Leopold was close enough that she could hear his breathing, steady but alert. Miss Mowbray, he said quietly. My hand is here if you want it. He did not reach for her. Adelaide extended one hand into the darkness and found his palm open. The contact was immediate and firm. His fingers closed only after hers did. No accident explained it, and no one else could see. She kept hold while Hollis knelt, struck steel to flint, and coaxed a spark into the tinder. The first weak glow revealed Leopold facing her rather than the hatch, as though the greater danger had been losing track of where she stood. Adelaide released him when the lantern caught. He let her go without resistance. Nothing in his expression claimed the moment, but something had changed between them. Trust had acquired warmth. Hollis raised the relit lantern toward the lever. In the stronger light, Adelaide saw the pattern clearly. 3 shallow marks crossed the iron, followed by one deeper notch. She pictured the blackened crank below, its third tooth filed flat. The scoring corresponds to the crank, she said. Each turn catches here. The flattened tooth would miss one line, then strike it on the next movement. The West Nursery, Hollis said. Adelaide nodded. That bell is not haunted. It is being selected. Crewe's face had gone still. Before anyone could press him, Lady Emmeline's voice rose from the stair below, bright and carrying. His Grace's midsummer dinner will proceed on the 24th. I will not have political guests inconvenienced by Miss Mowbray's experiments. Leopold looked toward the darkness beyond the hatch. Adelaide looked at the 6 connected wires. Someone had built a way to command the house from hiding. Now they had chosen the night when all of Keldon would be watching. Sewer. By the evening of the 24th of June, Keldon Hall had acquired the deceptive calm of a stage before the curtain rose. Every lamp had been trimmed. Every decanter stood in its proper place. The servants had received written instructions and repeated them aloud. Adelaide had assigned 1 footman to remain near the service board, another at the dining room door, and Thomas to record any irregular call rather than obey it without confirmation. Hollis had inspected the bell lines before noon. Nothing had moved. Crewe had declared the mechanism safe with the satisfaction of a man presenting his own innocence as craftsmanship. Lady Emmeline wore silver silk and presided over the arriving guests as though the evening had been arranged in her honor. Among them was a minister traveling north on government business, accompanied by a private secretary who guarded a leather dispatch case with more attention than he gave any person in the room. Shortly before dinner, the secretary followed Leopold into the Duke's study. Hollis carried in a tray with sealing wax and sand, then returned alone. "A dispatch has been placed on His Grace's writing desk," he told Adelaide quietly. "Sealed and unopened. Who entered after you?" "No one." "And the study door?" "Closed, not locked. His Grace expects to review it after dinner." Adelaide glanced toward the service passage. The household had enough eyes for ordinary disorder. It did not yet have enough for deliberate confusion. "Place Thomas where he can see the study corridor as well as the board." Hollis nodded. "You expect trouble. I expect someone to use the largest audience available." Dinner began with precision. The first course passed without incident. Soup moved cleanly from kitchen to dining room. Wine reached the proper hands. Lady Emmeline smiled whenever Adelaide crossed the passage, and each smile felt like a curtain being drawn over a hidden window. At the second course, just as Hollis signaled for the fish to be removed, every bell in the service passage rang at once. The sound struck like metal hail. Pointers jumped behind their labels. Library, West Nursery, Blue Drawing Room, Duke's Dressing Room, East Bedchamber, Morning Room. The hidden master line rattled above the ceiling. For half a breath, no servant moved. Then 3 contradictory instructions arrived together. A maid hurried down from the upper floor, saying, Lady Emmeline's sitting room bell had called for hot water. A footman swore the Blue Drawing Room demanded wine. Another insisted the Duke's dressing room had rung twice. "Hold your stations," Adelaide ordered. "No one answers an empty room." The bells continued. A junior footman carrying sauce hesitated, turned toward the wrong stair, and collided with a maid bringing warmed plates. The tray tipped. Silver struck stone. One plate slid beneath the dining room door, and a splash of pale sauce caught the hem of a guest's gown as she entered the passage in search of a retiring room. Her startled cry brought several diners to the threshold. Laughter followed from one gentleman who had taken too much wine. Lady Emmeline appeared behind them, composed and bright-eyed. "What extraordinary management," she said. Adelaide ignored the insult. "Thomas, remain by the board. Hollis, return the guests to the dining room. Mrs. Preece, see to the lady's gown. No servant leaves the floor without a written instruction." The west nursery pointer struck again. Then all 6 bells stopped together. The silence was worse than the noise, because everyone waited to see whom it would condemn. Crewe came through the lower passage, carrying a folded sheet. "This is what comes of unauthorized alteration," he announced. He opened Adelaide's bell route sketch before the gathered servants and guests. Her handwriting marked every line. Her observations showed which pointers moved together. "Miss Mowbray is the only person who has mapped the entire system," he said. "She alone knows how one call may affect another." "I mapped it because it was already behaving improperly," Adelaide replied. "Or because you wished to make yourself necessary," Lady Emmeline said. Her voice was soft enough to seem reluctant and clear enough for the dining room to hear. "A frightened household clings to the person who claims she alone can save it." Murmurs moved beyond the door. Leopold entered the passage with the minister's secretary close behind him. The Duke looked first at Adelaide, then at the sketch in Crewe's hand. "Why are the guests standing here?" "Because the service has collapsed," Emmeline answered. "Miss Mowbray's improvements have become rather dramatic," the secretary interrupted. "Your Grace, the dispatch." Leopold turned. "What of it?" "It is gone." The passage became still. Hollis stepped forward. "I saw it placed on the study desk before dinner." "The door was closed," the secretary said. "I returned when the bells began. The case was open. The dispatch was no longer inside." Adelaide looked at Thomas. His face had gone pale. "Who passed the study corridor?" she asked. "2 footmen, miss, both answering bells. Then Lady Emmeline's maid crossed toward the west stair. I lost sight of the door when the tray fell." Emmeline's maid lowered her eyes. "I was sent for smelling salts." "By whom?" Adelaide asked. Lady Emmeline's expression hardened. "Surely you are not questioning my maid before guests." Crewe held up the route sketch. The confusion followed Miss Mowbray's design. Her plan gave access to every call and every movement below stairs. "A plan records a mechanism," Adelaide said. "It does not operate it." The minister's secretary looked toward Leopold. "Until the paper is recovered, Your Grace, access to the household passages must be restricted." Leopold's jaw tightened. Adelaide saw the old fear return behind his control. Not fear of bells. Fear of public disorder, political embarrassment, and a house proving ungovernable before men whose judgment carried beyond Yorkshire. "No one will search Miss Mowbray's room," he said. Crewe began to object. Leopold silenced him with a glance. "Nor will any servant be questioned alone. Hollis will remain present." Relief moved through the staff, but it did not reach Adelaide. Protection was not trust if it left suspicion standing in the center of the room. "The bell system must be placed under one authority," the secretary said. "Not hers," Emmeline murmured. Leopold looked at Adelaide. For one suspended moment, she believed he might choose what he had learned over what the room demanded. Instead, he turned to Hollis. "Until the dispatch is found, Miss Mowbray's authority over the bell system is withdrawn. Crewe will take technical control under your observation." The words did not accuse her. They did something colder. They removed the work she had earned before the same servants who had learned to trust it. Crewe extended his hand for the operational slate. Adelaide did not give it to him. She crossed to Hollis and placed it in the butler's keeping. "Mr. Hollis remains responsible for service," she said. "Mr. Crewe may advise him." "Miss Mowbray," Leopold said, warning beneath the restraint. She faced him. "Your Grace may withdraw my authority. He may not lend my name to the appearance of order while another man commands the work." The dining room doorway held guests, servants, and Lady Emmeline's quiet satisfaction. Adelaide kept her spine straight. I will not leave Keldon Hall while suspicion follows me. I will also not remain as a decorative housekeeper who absorbs blame and signs decisions she did not make, until your grace decides whether trust requires proof or must sometimes precede it. I retire from official duty. Leopold's expression changed, but he did not call her back. Adelaide passed through the watching household without haste. No one touched her. No one laughed now, before dawn, while Crewe held the bell access, and Adelaide remained in her chamber. 2 bells rang from the lower passage. One called from the locked west nursery. The other came from Leopold's empty study. Sewers. The 2 bells before dawn destroyed the simplest accusation against Adelaide, but they did not restore what had been taken from her. She heard the west nursery call once, followed by the sharper bell from Leopold's empty study, while she remained seated beside the cold hearth in her chamber with both hands visible on the arms of the chair. Mrs. Preece was with her, having brought tea that neither woman drank. In the passage outside, footsteps multiplied. No one came to search Adelaide's room. No one needed to. Crewe held technical control of the system. Adelaide had surrendered the operational slate to Hollis before witnesses. Yet the bells had rung again. At breakfast, the servants moved with the strained quiet of people, afraid that any wrong glance might be remembered as evidence. Adelaide did not enter the household office. She had said she would retire from official duty, and she would not imitate authority after refusing its hollow appearance. Mrs. Preece brought her a written account instead. The study had been empty. The west nursery remained locked. Thomas had seen Crewe near the lower bell passage 20 minutes before the calls. Crewe claimed he had been examining the lines. By 9, hammering began behind the service board. Adelaide rose at once. "Who authorized work?" she asked. "Mr. Crewe says the system must come down before it causes another disturbance," Mrs. Preece replied. Adelaide left her chamber and reached the passage before the first screw had been removed. Crewe stood beside 2 workmen whose tools lay open on the floor. Hollis watched with visible disapproval, but the Duke had placed technical control in Crewe's hands. That fact held everyone still. "Stop," Adelaide said. One workman lowered his hammer. Crewe did not turn. "You retired from official duty, Miss Mowbray." "I did. Evidence did not." He faced her then. "There is no evidence. There is a dangerous, obsolete mechanism which must be dismantled. If you remove the bracket, cut the lines, or separate the master crank from the board, you destroy the pattern we observed." "There is no pattern. Then preserving it cannot harm you." Crewe's eyes narrowed. "You are interfering with His Grace's order. His Grace placed technical control in your hands. He did not authorize destruction of the mechanism. You presume a great deal. I presume only that a man who is innocent should not need to erase the condition of the thing he is accused of misusing." The workman looked down. Crewe picked up the screwdriver himself. "Stand aside." "No." The word came from behind Adelaide. Leopold entered the passage with the minister's secretary and Mr. Hollis beside him. His face bore the stillness Adelaide had learned to distrust when society was watching. But this time the stillness was directed at Crewe. "Nothing is to be removed," he said. Crewe straightened. "Your Grace." The bells rang again, because Miss Mowbray's alterations have left the system unstable. Miss Mowbray made no physical alteration. Her mapping encouraged servants to tamper with lines they did not understand. Then, why did the bells ring after she withdrew and you assumed control? Crewe's mouth opened. No answer came. Leopold looked at the workmen. Close your tool chests. No further work begins without Mr. Hollis present and written instruction from my solicitor. The men obeyed immediately. Crewe tried once more. Delay may make the danger worse. Removal may make the truth impossible to recover. Leopold's gaze did not leave him. You are suspended from all access to the bellboard, service loft, west gallery, and repair records until Mr. Latham has examined them. The passage changed around that sentence. Crewe had not been dismissed, but the house had heard his authority break. You place the word of an acting housekeeper above mine, he said. Leopold's expression hardened. I place observed facts above your convenience. Crewe bowed with rigid correctness and left. Adelaide remained where she stood. She had warned them. Leopold had acted. Neither fact repaired the previous evening. He seemed to understand that, because he did not thank her, praise her, or ask her to return to work in the passage where everyone could watch. Miss Mowbray, he said quietly, may I speak with you in the morning room? The doors remained open. Hollis stood in the outer corridor, near enough to preserve propriety and far enough not to hear every word. Adelaide took the chair nearest the doorway. Leopold did not sit behind the writing desk. He stood opposite her for a moment, then chose the plain chair beside the cold fireplace. There was no tray between them and no bell within reach. I was wrong, he said. Adelaide waited, not because the bells rang again. That only made my error easier to see. I was wrong when I withdrew your authority before people who had watched you earn it. I told myself I was preserving order. I was preserving my political dignity. His voice remained controlled, but the control no longer protected him from the meaning of his own words. I let the minister's secretary, the guests, and my fear of public disorder decide what courage required of me. You bore the suspicion created by that fear. Adelaide looked at him steadily. You prevented my room from being searched. That was not enough. No. I would like to say, I protected you. You protected me from the ugliest version of the accusation. You did not trust me against the accusation itself. He accepted the distinction without defense. You are right. Silence rested between them. It was not the intimate silence of the household office or the dark bell gallery. This one had edges. It required truth from both sides. There is something else, Adelaide said. On my first day, I heard what you said to Mr. Hollis. Leopold went still. In the service passage? Yes. You heard me say you would not last. Every servant near the board heard you. A brief, pained disbelief crossed his face, and you remained. I remained because Nell Dyer was standing beneath a falling tureen, not because you had offered me confidence. He lowered his gaze. Then my first act was to make your authority harder before you had even begun. It was. I cannot undo that. No, I can name it. I can correct what still can be corrected, and I can accept that correction may not earn forgiveness. Adelaide felt the careful wall inside her shift, but she did not lower it merely because he had finally spoken honestly. What are you offering? Your full wages whether you resign today or complete the appointment. An honest character stating that you acted with courage and competence. If you wish to leave Keldon, I will provide a carriage, and no one will be permitted to suggest dismissal. And if I stay, you may resume your duties on whatever terms protect your judgment. A pension, she asked, if you require one. A ceremonial post with no true command? No, because I will accept neither. He nodded. I understand. Do you? Adelaide leaned forward slightly. I will not be kept in comfort while another person makes decisions under my name. I will not be praised privately and doubted publicly. If I resume my post, my authority must be restored before the final proof exists, not after belief becomes safe. Leopold held her gaze. This was the question beneath every bell, every order, and every moment of restrained tenderness. Would he trust her while trust still carried a cost? Yes, he said, before the proof. And Mr. Crewe, removed from bell access and repair authority, pending examination. The servants who spoke, protected by my written word, even if their evidence reflects badly on my family. Lady Emmeline, she will not countermand you. Adelaide sat back. Then I will resume for one purpose, to protect the household and uncover the truth. Hope moved through his expression, but she stopped it before it could become presumption. I have not promised forgiveness. I know, and you are not to interpret duty as reconciliation. I will not. That afternoon, Leopold assembled the indoor servants in the lower hall. Crewe stood apart, no longer beside the bellboard. Lady Emmeline watched from the staircase with one hand resting on the rail. Leopold did not soften the correction. Miss Mowbray's domestic authority is restored in full. It should not have been withdrawn. Mr. Crewe is suspended from the bell system and all related work until Mr. Latham completes his examination. Any order concerning service, witnesses, or household safety will pass through Miss Mowbray and Mr. Hollis. No applause followed. Adelaide was grateful for that. Applause would have turned justice into spectacle. The servants simply looked at her and waited. She stepped beside the operational slate, but did not take it from Hollis yet. Tomorrow, she said, no servant will answer a bell. A murmur passed through the hall. Adelaide continued. Every ordinary cord will be tied off in the presence of witnesses. Requests will be carried by written slip. Rounds will occur at fixed times. If any pointer moves, we will know the call did not come from a room. She took the slate then. Across the hall, Leopold stood where she had asked him to stand, neither before her nor above the evidence. Behind the silent bellboard, the blackened master crank waited for a day when no honest hand would touch a cord. At 6 o'clock the next morning, every ordinary bell cord in Keldon Hall was tied off beneath witness knots. Mr. Hollis supervised the upper rooms. Mrs. Preece oversaw the servants' chambers and sitting rooms. Adelaide remained at the service board with Mr. Latham, the Duke's solicitor, who had arrived before breakfast carrying a leather case and the patient expression of a man who trusted ink more than appearances. Each cord was bound with narrow white tape. Each knot received the initials of the household officer who had witnessed it. No servant was to untie one without Adelaide, Hollis, or Latham present. By 7, the house began its first day without bells. Requests moved by written slip. Footmen made fixed rounds through the principal rooms every quarter hour. Maids carried hot water according to a posted schedule. The kitchen sent meals by the clock rather than by frantic summons. Lady Emmeline objected before breakfast. I will not send a written message for every cup of tea. Adelaide stood beside the household table, checking the morning slips. Then your ladyship may request tea during the regular round, and if I require something urgently, a servant is stationed outside the main passage. This is absurd. It is temporary. So are you, Emmeline said. The room stilled. Adelaide did not look up from the slate. Then, we are both familiar with uncertainty, my lady. Leopold entered in time to hear the answer. His gaze rested on Adelaide for one brief moment, then moved to Emmeline. The silent service continues. Emmeline turned toward him. You cannot seriously mean to inconvenience the entire house because she has designed another experiment. I mean to discover whether the bells move when no room can call them. And when they do not, then Miss Mowbray's caution will have cost us paper, his tone sharpened. When they do, it may cost someone far more. Emmeline left the room without tea. The morning proceeded with fewer errors than anyone expected. Written requests forced guests to decide what they actually needed. Servants ceased running to empty rooms. The kitchen sent breakfast in order. Even the minister's secretary, who remained at Keldon until the missing dispatch was recovered, admitted that the house seemed calmer without a single bell sounding. At noon, Adelaide stood with Hollis and Mr. Latham before the board. Every pointer was still. Thomas had just delivered the final round of written slips. Mrs. Preece was checking the upper corridor. Crewe remained confined to his chamber under instruction not to approach the service passages. Leopold stood near the arch, saying nothing. The west nursery pointer moved. It trembled once, rose halfway, and struck the stop with a thin metallic click. No other pointer followed. Hollis stared at it. "The cord is tied." "And witnessed," Latham said. He opened his notebook. "By whom?" "Myself and Mrs. Preece." Hollis answered. Adelaide did not touch the board. The call did not come from the room. "Then it came from above," Leopold said. "From the cross line," Adelaide replied. She looked at Latham. "You saw the pointer move?" "I did, and no one touched the board." "No one." He recorded both facts. Hollis sent Thomas to fetch Mrs. Preece. She returned, carrying the signed tape from the west nursery cord. The knot remained intact. The service board had moved while every ordinary pull was secured. The question was no longer whether a hidden mechanism existed. It was where the line had been operated and what else its route concealed. Adelaide studied the sketch she had made weeks earlier. The west nursery line passed above the blue drawing room, crossed the service loft, then descended through the wall behind Lady Emmeline's sitting room before reaching the lower board. "There is an old bell cabinet in her sitting room," Hollis said, "built into the panelling. It has not been used in years." Lady Emmeline refused the search at once. "My rooms are private." They gathered outside her sitting room door with Latham, Hollis, Mrs. Preece, Leopold, and Emmeline's maid present. Adelaide did not enter until Leopold spoke. A government dispatch disappeared during a disturbance connected to this system. The search will be limited to the cabinet and the panel through which the line passes. Emmeline's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened around her fan. Any servant could have hidden something there. "Perhaps," Adelaide said, "that is why everyone present will witness what is found and where." The cabinet stood behind a narrow painted panel near the fireplace. Its outer door opened easily. Inside lay dust, a broken pull handle, 2 lengths of old cord, and a shallow wooden backing that did not sit flush. Hollis touched the edge. "This has been moved." Latham asked him to stop. He examined the gap, then permitted Hollis to lift the backing in the presence of all witnesses. A folded paper rested behind it. Cream government stock, red wax. The seal remained unbroken, the ministerial dispatch. Emmeline's maid made a small sound and lowered her head. Lady Emmeline recovered first. "As I said, any servant could have placed it there." "Could any servant enter this room without your knowledge?" Adelaide asked. "Of course. Maids attend me constantly." "Could any servant open the cabinet? It is not locked." "Could any servant know that the backing was loose?" Emmeline's expression cooled. "You seem determined to turn ignorance into guilt." "No, my lady. I am determining who had access to what." Leopold stepped between the exchange before it became spectacle. "The dispatch will go to Mr. Latham." Its seal will be examined before it is returned to me." The solicitor wrapped the paper in clean linen and placed it in his case. He recorded the location, the witnesses, and the unbroken condition of the seal. The minister's secretary was summoned. He confirmed the seal belonged to his office and had not been disturbed. Only after that did Leopold open the dispatch in private. Its contents were not shared. The household needed no political secret to understand what mattered. The paper had been stolen to create panic, not to obtain what it contained. The following morning, Latham returned to the service board with a carpenter, Hollis, Adelaide, Leopold, and 2 servants as witnesses. Crewe was brought under supervision, but not permitted near the mechanism. "This is unnecessary," he said. "The dispatch was found in Lady Emmeline's room. The bellboard is irrelevant. The board created the confusion that allowed it to be moved." Adelaide replied, "That makes it central." Latham directed the carpenter to remove the blackened brass master crank without cutting the connected lines. Each screw was taken out in order and placed in a labelled envelope. The crank came free with a faint scrape. Its 3rd tooth remained filed flat. The blacking was intact, except for the small patch lifted during the earlier inspection. Latham wrapped it in linen, placed it in a wooden box, and sealed the lid with red wax impressed by his own signet. "The mechanism remains in my custody," he said. "It will be examined here by an independent tradesman." Crewe gave a dismissive laugh. "And where will you find such a specialist?" "Leeds," Adelaide said. "A bell founder can judge whether this was cast recently and for what purpose." Latham nodded. "A mounted messenger will leave today." Lady Emmeline entered the passage before the witnesses dispersed. "You cannot mean to preserve testimony from servants who have contradicted themselves since this began." She looked directly at Leopold. "Dismiss them now, before their gossip becomes public." Thomas stood near the lower stair. Clara Webb waited beside Mrs. Preece. Both went pale. Leopold's answer came without hesitation. "No servant will be dismissed for truthful evidence. You would place their word against mine. I will place facts wherever they belong." Then you invite every ambitious maid and resentful footman in England to invent grievances. I invite them to speak without hunger being used as a gag. Emmeline stared at him, then at Adelaide. For once she had no polished reply. She turned and left. Adelaide stood beside Leopold while Latham carried the sealed box toward the household office. The Duke had not looked at her while refusing Emmeline. He had not made the defence a performance for her approval. He had simply done what he had promised when it still cost him family peace and social comfort. Adelaide lifted her hand and touched his sleeve only once. Her fingers rested lightly against the dark cloth near his wrist. Leopold looked down, then back at her face. He did not cover her hand. He did not draw her closer. He remained still and allowed her to decide how long the contact would last. "Thank you," she said, "for them. I should have protected them sooner. You protected them now." Adelaide let her hand fall. The moment was small, but it did not feel uncertain. Trust had returned by one measured degree. Outside, the mounted messenger prepared for the road to Leeds. Inside Mr. Latham's sealed box, blacking still concealed part of the brass. Before the next evening, an independent founder would begin to scrape it away. Lady Emmeline offered Adelaide exile as though it were a kindness. She came to the morning room shortly after breakfast on the 1st of July, dressed for travel in dove-coloured silk, though no carriage had been ordered. The door remained open to the corridor. Mrs. Preece worked at the linen table within sight, and Mr. Hollis passed often enough to preserve propriety, without intruding. Adelaide stood beside the window with the household slate in one hand when Emmeline entered carrying a sealed letter. "You have made your point," Emmeline said. "Have I? The servants admire you. Leopold defends you. Crewe has been humiliated, and half the county will soon hear that Keldon Hall was nearly undone by its own bells." Adelaide set down the slate. The house was not nearly undone by bells. It was nearly undone by those who taught people to fear answering them. Emmeline's smile thinned. "You do enjoy a moral sentence, only when a plain one has been ignored." Emmeline crossed to the centre table and placed the sealed letter upon it. A widow of excellent family in Bath requires a companion. Her household is quiet. Her expectations are modest. She would pay generously. Adelaide did not touch the letter. "Why would your ladyship arrange employment for me?" "Because remaining here will not improve your position. My position has already been restored, temporarily." Emmeline glanced toward the open door, then lowered her voice. "You are still a paid housekeeper in a duke's residence. People will not remember your efficiency. They will remember that His Grace took an unusual interest in you while a government paper disappeared." The cruelty was polished, but the intention beneath it was clear. Emmeline wanted Adelaide to hear what society might say and mistake fear for prudence. "What else comes with this employment?" Adelaide asked. "A generous reference from me, silence concerning the midsummer disturbance. No gossip encouraged through Kynaston connections. And in return? You leave before the bell-maker arrives." Adelaide held her gaze. "The founder has already arrived." A small pause followed. Emmeline recovered quickly. "Then leave before he performs another of your little demonstrations. He is examining a mechanism in Mr. Latham's custody. It is not my demonstration. The crank cannot condemn Crewe." Emmeline moved closer to the table. The maker's mark was scraped away before it was blackened. There is nothing beneath that filth worth finding. The room seemed to narrow around the words. Adelaide did not look toward Mrs. Preece. She did not betray surprise by so much as a breath. Mr. Latham had allowed only 5 people to know that a workshop mark had been exposed beneath the blacking. Adelaide, Leopold, Hollis, Latham, the founder. Crewe would know because he had ordered the piece. Lady Emmeline should not. "Who told you the mark had been scraped?" Adelaide asked. Emmeline's face became very still. "I am speaking generally." "No. You said the mark was scraped away before the crank was blackened. Anyone might assume that. Anyone might assume the mark was hidden. Only someone who knew it had existed would describe how it was removed." Emmeline picked up the sealed letter. "You are twisting ordinary language. Then answer one ordinary question. How did you know?" For the first time since Adelaide had met her, Emmeline's composure failed without transforming into anger. It became calculation. Her eyes shifted toward the corridor, measuring who might have heard. "Take the Bath position," she said. "It is the last offer you will receive from me. Then it is easily refused." Emmeline left with the letter still in her hand. Adelaide waited until her footsteps had faded before crossing to the writing desk. She wrote the date, the hour, the location, the open condition of the door, the persons within sight, and Emmeline's exact words. Mrs. Preece read the account and signed that she had heard the reference to the scraped mark. Hollis signed that he had seen Emmeline enter and depart. Adelaide carried the paper directly to Mr. Latham. He placed it with the repair estimate, the threat notices, and the record of the crank's removal. "You did not challenge her beyond the question?" he asked. "No. Good. A careless truth is most useful before the speaker learns to replace it. The independent founder completed his examination before noon. His name was Mr. Josiah Bell, a compact man from Leeds, with brass dust beneath his nails and no patience for rank when metal offered a clearer answer. The sealed box was opened before Latham, Leopold, Hollis, Adelaide, and 2 witnesses. Mr. Bell scraped away another narrow line of blacking. Beneath it lay the shallow remains of a workshop stamp. "Mine," he said. The outer letters were filed down, but the central strike remains. Latham opened his notebook. "When was this piece cast?" "Within 2 years, no earlier." "For whom, Mr.?" Bell looked toward Crewe, who stood under supervision at the far end of the room. "A man using the name Mr. Crane ordered it, gave instructions for a multiple-line action, but described it as a safety release for an old house." "Did you meet him?" Latham asked. "Twice." Mr. Bell pointed without hesitation. "That is the man." Crewe gave a short laugh. "A tradesman's memory after 2 years is not proof." "It has not been 2 years," Mr. Bell replied. "It was last October. You complained about the price for 3/4 of an hour." Hollis looked down, perhaps to hide satisfaction. Mr. Bell produced a copied entry from his workshop book. The original remained in Leeds, but the date, dimensions, and payment were clearly recorded. Crewe had used a false surname. The measurements matched the crank. Before the examination ended, Thomas brought word that a dismissed footman waited at the servants' entrance asking to speak with Miss Mowbray. His name was Samuel Pike, formerly of Keldon Hall. Hollis remembered him as the young man discharged the previous winter for drunken unreliability. Samuel denied the charge. He said Lady Emmeline had paid him to pull hidden lines after midnight, then threatened his character when he asked for more money. "She told me no one would believe a dismissed footman," he said. "She may still be right." Adelaide did not promise otherwise. "You will speak voluntarily, before witnesses, and only to what you saw and did. His Grace will provide written protection from retaliation. If you seek another place, your truthful evidence will not be used against your character." Samuel's shoulders lowered for the first time. "Then I'll speak." By late afternoon, the evidence no longer required a private conclusion. It required a public demonstration. Adelaide proposed remounting the master crank under Mr. Latham's supervision and showing, before relevant witnesses, exactly how one hidden movement could command 6 empty rooms. Leopold listened without interruption. "You will lead it?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you want me beside you?" The question carried more than placement. Adelaide thought of the dining room doorway, the withdrawn authority, and the apology that had followed only when truth became unavoidable. Then she thought of the morning he restored her before proof had made trust safe. "I want you present," she said, "behind me while I give the evidence." Leopold did not hesitate. "Then behind you is where I will stand." Mr. Latham and Hollis left to arrange the witness list. The morning room door remained open. Adelaide and Leopold stood alone within it, separated by several feet and everything that had not yet been said. "I am sorry," he told her, "not merely for withdrawing your authority. I am sorry that I made you prove your dignity in a house where my word had already made it harder for others to see. You have said this before, I know. I am not repeating it to obtain forgiveness." His voice softened. "I am repeating it because remorse should not become silent merely because it is inconvenient." Adelaide looked at the man who had once treated his own home as a place to survive rather than inhabit. He had not become perfect. He had become accountable. That mattered more. She crossed the distance between them and placed her arms around him. Leopold did not seize the moment. He held her carefully, one hand between her shoulder blades, the other resting lightly at her upper arm. The embrace was warm, steady, and free of demand. Adelaide remained there long enough to feel his breath change. Then she stepped back, and he released her at once. Neither called it forgiveness. Neither mistook it for a promise. Yet when Adelaide turned toward the open door, she no longer felt that she stood alone before what came next. For the next 2 weeks, Keldon Hall learned the difference between secrecy and preparation. Nothing connected to the bells moved without Mr. Latham's written direction. The blackened brass crank remained sealed in its wooden box until the morning of the 16th of July. When the solicitor broke his own wax before Adelaide, Leopold, Hollis, Mr. Bell, and 2 household witnesses, the founder lifted the mechanism with both hands, examined the filed third tooth, and remounted it beneath the service board, using the original screws in their recorded order. Each room line received a plain paper label: library, blue drawing room, Duke's dressing room, morning room, east bedchamber, west nursery. No decorative card concealed the wires now. Every connection could be followed from crank to pointer. Adelaide stood at the household table with her bell route sketch beside Mr. Latham's notes. The sketch remained genuine and unaltered. That fact mattered. Crewe had tried to turn her knowledge into guilt. Tomorrow, the same knowledge would make deception visible. Hollis reconstructed the positions of the servants during the midsummer dinner. Thomas had stood between the board and the study corridor. Mrs. Preece had been near the upper stair. 2 footmen had left the dining room door after contradictory calls. A maid had crossed toward Lady Emmeline's sitting room. Each person marked the route taken and the time remembered. Adelaide stopped them whenever certainty began to improve with repetition. "Tell us what you saw, not what you believe now," she said. "A true account doesn't need to become tidier each time it's spoken." Mr. Latham approved with a small nod. Crewe, confined to a chair under supervision at the far end of the passage, watched in silence until Mr. Bell turned the crank 1 notch. 6 pointers moved together. The sound was less violent in daylight, yet every servant nearby stiffened. Mr. Bell released the handle. "That's no safety device," he said. "A safety release should ease tension from a line. This gathers lines under one action." Crewe leaned forward. "You built what was ordered. I built what was described falsely. You can't prove why it was wanted." "No," Mr. Bell replied. "I can prove what it does." Adelaide looked toward the west nursery pointer. When the crank moved a second time, the filed tooth missed 1 catch. On the 3rd movement, the pointer struck. The old haunting had a rhythm. Someone had designed it. Before the test ended, Lady Emmeline's maid appeared at the mouth of the passage. Her face had lost the smooth neutrality expected of a personal servant. She asked to speak before Mr. Latham and His Grace. Adelaide led her to the morning room, where the door remained open and Mrs. Preece sat within sight. The maid did not sit. "I hid the dispatch," she said. Leopold's expression did not change. "At whose instruction?" The woman's hands tightened around one another. "Lady Emmeline's." Mr. Latham took up his pen. "Begin with what happened before dinner. Her ladyship told me there'd be confusion after the 2nd course. She said I was to go through the study passage when the bells began. The dispatch case would be open. I was to take only the folded paper and place it behind the old cabinet backing in her sitting room." "Did you open it?" Leopold asked. "No, Your Grace. She told me the seal must remain whole." "Why did you obey?" Adelaide asked. The maid's eyes filled, though her voice remained controlled. She said my younger sister would lose her place in London if I refused. She said no lady would take either of us without a character from her family. Adelaide felt the old machinery of fear beneath the polished social threat. Did Lady Emmeline say why she wanted the dispatch moved? She said it would prove Miss Mowbray had made herself necessary by creating disorder. She said His Grace would never keep a housekeeper connected to a government scandal. Leopold looked away for one moment, and Adelaide knew he had heard the weapon inside the plan. It had depended upon his weakness as much as upon Emmeline's cruelty. Mr. Latham read the statement back slowly. The maid corrected one phrase, then signed. "Will my sister be dismissed?" she asked. Leopold answered at once. "No, you gave evidence voluntarily. Neither of you will lose employment or character for telling the truth. Even after what I did, you'll answer honestly for what you did." Adelaide said, "But coercion won't be hidden merely because obedience made the act possible." The maid looked at her with exhausted gratitude. No promise of innocence had been offered. Something better had: fairness. By late afternoon, the witness list was complete. The local magistrate had agreed to attend the estate inquiry the following day. Mr. Bell would explain the crank. Hollis would reconstruct the service positions. Thomas and the dismissed footman, Samuel Pike, would describe the hidden calls. Lady Emmeline's maid would give her account of the dispatch. Crewe would be permitted to answer, but not to touch the mechanism or records. All evidence would remain in Mr. Latham's custody after the demonstration. Adelaide checked every arrangement twice, then forced herself to stop. The house would not become safer because she refused to rest. Near sunset, she entered the conservatory and found Leopold beside the open terrace doors. The warm air carried the scent of damp earth and orange leaves. A gardener crossed the far terrace with a watering can, distant enough to grant privacy and near enough to preserve propriety. Leopold held no papers. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll repeat what I said to Hollis on your first day." Adelaide stopped beside a stone table. "That I wouldn't last a month." "Yes, you don't owe the courtyard a performance of self-punishment. It won't be one." He faced her. "The words helped shape how the household received you. I used my authority carelessly. Correcting that in private would protect my pride, not your name." Adelaide studied the steadiness in his face. Humiliation isn't repaired by making oneself smaller. What repairs it? Truth spoken without demanding reward. "Then that's what I'll offer." He came no closer. The space between them held every stage by which trust had returned. The coat asked for before it touched her shoulders. His open hand in the dark gallery. The apology that did not ask to be comforted. Her own embrace. "There's something I must ask before tomorrow. Changes everything," he said. Adelaide's breath slowed. "Ask it. May I kiss you?" No title stood between the words, no rank pressed upon them. He had asked, and the choice remained wholly hers. "Yes," she said. Then she stepped toward him. Leopold lifted one hand to her cheek, but waited until she leaned into the touch. His kiss was gentle, deliberate, and warm, with feeling held under careful restraint. It did not claim forgiveness or promise a future they had not yet named. It acknowledged what had grown between them while they were learning to trust. When he drew back, he searched her face rather than assuming. Adelaide saw wonder there, and a tenderness so unguarded that it moved through her like light, entering a long-closed room. She touched his cheek. "That was your question," she murmured. "This is my answer." She kissed him again by her own choice. His hand settled lightly at her waist, never pulling, only receiving the closeness she offered. The second kiss lasted longer, but it remained soft and unhurried. When Adelaide stepped back, Leopold released her at once. Neither spoke of love, not yet. Justice still waited in the service courtyard. Beyond the conservatory, the evening bells of the parish church carried over the fields. Inside Keldon Hall, the remounted board stood ready beneath its paper labels. At noon the next day, it would be carried into the open air. And the house that had been trained to fear its own voice would finally be made to tell the truth. At noon on the 17th of July, the bellboard stood on a trestle in the service courtyard beneath the open summer sky. The household servants formed two quiet rows along the stone wall. The minister's secretary stood beside Mr. Latham. Mr. Bell waited near the mechanism with his sleeves turned back. The local magistrate occupied a plain chair, not a raised bench, because this was an estate inquiry and demonstration, not a trial. Lady Emmeline stood beneath the arcade in pale green silk, composed enough to suggest she had attended only to observe another person's disgrace. Crewe stood several yards from the trestle under the watch of two estate men. Leopold remained behind Adelaide, exactly where she had asked him to stand. Adelaide placed her genuine bell route sketch on the table beside Mr. Latham's notes. This board frightened Keldon Hall because it appeared to carry messages from empty rooms, she said. Her voice reached the servants without strain. Today, we will show that the rooms were never speaking. Mr. Bell stepped forward at her invitation. He pulled the library cord fixed to the demonstration frame. One pointer moved. He pulled the blue drawing-room line. A second pointer answered. Each honest room pull controls one call, Adelaide said. Now turn the master crank. Mr. Bell rotated the blackened brass handle once. 6 pointers jumped together. A stir passed through the servants. The West Nursery pointer trembled but did not strike. On the second turn, 5 calls sounded again. On the third, the filed tooth caught the scored lever, and the West Nursery bell struck sharply above the others. Several maids flinched. Adelaide did not. The third tooth was filed flat, she said. It missed the nursery line on one movement and caught it on the next. That irregular rhythm created the appearance of a bell acting alone. Mr. Bell showed the filed tooth, the bright brass beneath the blacking, and the remains of his workshop mark. I cast this piece last October, he said. It wasn't an old fitting. It was ordered by that man under the name Crane. He pointed toward Crewe. Crewe lifted his chin. You remember a customer after months because Miss Mowbray required you to remember him, Mr. Bell looked unimpressed. I remember a man who argued over the price for 3/4 of an hour. My workshop book remembers the measurements. Mr. Latham held up the witnessed copy while keeping the original record's location in Leeds clear. The dimensions match the mechanism before us. Adelaide then asked Mr. Finch, the estate carpenter, to describe the bracket. He confirmed that the screw holes were recent and that blacking had been applied to make the brass appear old. Hollis testified that Crewe had supervised the West Service repairs the previous autumn. The repair estimate dated 2 days before the false fire bell was read aloud. You priced a replacement before the danger occurred, Adelaide said. Crewe's eyes hardened. I anticipated failure. You also had access to the flue whose damper was wedged shut. So did Workman. One of the 2 men endangered by the smoke stepped forward. We left the maintenance fire cold, sir. Mr. Crewe sent us out early and kept the passage key. Crewe turned toward the magistrate. This is servant resentment dressed as proof. Then let us continue with what the servants actually saw, Adelaide said. Samuel Pike gave his account next. He described being paid by Lady Emmeline to operate hidden lines after midnight. He admitted accepting money. He also described being dismissed when he threatened to speak. She said no one would believe a footman without a character. He finished. Lady Emmeline's expression did not alter. A dismissed servant will say anything for restoration. "My character hasn't been restored," Samuel replied. "I came because Miss Mowbray said I could tell the truth without pretending I'd done no wrong." That answer moved through the courtyard more powerfully than outrage. Emmeline's maid came forward with Mrs. Preece beside her. She described the midsummer confusion, the open dispatch case, and Emmeline's instruction to hide the sealed government paper behind the bell cabinet in her sitting room. Mr. Latham confirmed that the dispatch had been recovered there with its seal unbroken. The minister's secretary confirmed the same. "You cannot prove I placed it there," Emmeline said. "No," Adelaide answered. "Your maid has admitted that she did. The question is who instructed her." A frightened woman repeating what she thinks will save her position. Adelaide looked at the maid. "Did anyone promise you innocence?" "No." "Did anyone offer money?" "No." "Did anyone tell you what to say?" "No." "Miss Mowbray told me to say only what I saw and did." Adelaide turned back to Emmeline. "Your own knowledge also speaks. You told me the maker's mark had been scraped away before the crank was blackened. At that time, the existence and condition of the mark were known only to those present at Mr. Latham's examination, to Mr. Bell, and to the person who ordered the mechanism." Emmeline's composure finally cracked. "Crewe told me afterward." Crewe looked at her. "I did no such thing." The denial came too fast. Mr. Latham's gaze sharpened. Adelaide let the silence work. "Then one of you has just contradicted the other," she said. Crewe stepped forward before the estate men stopped him. "She ordered the disturbances. She wanted the house made unmanageable so His Grace would depend upon her again." Emmeline turned on him. "And you wanted every failure to produce another repair contract. You paid for the night calls. You designed the mechanism." Their accusations struck each other in the open air until the full alliance became visible without further prompting. Crewe admitted ordering the crank under a false name. He admitted rerouting the lines. He claimed Emmeline had proposed the midsummer scandal and the false haunting. Emmeline admitted she had wanted Adelaide to fail, and Keldon to need her influence again, but denied intending physical harm. Crewe's silence when asked about the wedged flue damper answered more than his words. The magistrate rose. "The question of fraud, coercion, and dangerous sabotage will proceed under proper authority. Mr. Crewe will remain in custody pending examination of the contracts and accounts." The estate men took position beside Crewe. Mr. Latham gathered the repair estimates, the threat notices, and the sealed records. Leopold then stepped forward, but he did not stand in front of Adelaide. He stood beside the table, facing the servants and guests. On Miss Mowbray's first day at Keldon, before she had crossed the passage, I told Mr. Hollis that she would not last a month. No one moved. She heard me. So did members of this household. I judged her before I knew her. Later, when courage required trust, I withdrew her authority to protect my political appearance. Her vindication does not come from my affection, my title, or my willingness to speak now. It comes from her judgment, from the witnesses she protected, and from proof she preserved when I failed to do so. His voice remained steady, but there was no shield left in it. The shame is not Miss Mowbray's. It is mine. Lady Emmeline was ordered to leave Keldon Hall before evening under proper supervision. Keldon patronage and invitations connected to her were withdrawn. The servants threatened with false characters received written protection. The endangered workmen were promised compensation from money recovered through Crewe's contracts. When the inquiry ended, Mr. Bell removed the master crank again. Mr. Latham sealed it for transfer to the magistrate's custody. Adelaide watched until the box left the courtyard. Only then did she allow herself to breathe without counting who remained unsafe. Leopold approached her after the witnesses had dispersed. "When your appointment concludes, may I ask permission to court you?" he said. "Not as reward, not as rescue." Adelaide looked toward the quiet board on its trestle. "You may court me," she said, "if you understand that partnership is not another word for obedience." "I understand. You are still learning." A faint smile touched his face. "Then I hope you'll permit me to continue." Later, on the west terrace, evening light lay across the stone, and the house behind them made only ordinary sounds. Leopold offered his hand. Adelaide placed hers in it. "I love you, Adelaide," he said, "not because you made yourself indispensable, but because you made every person in that house less afraid." The words reached the wound she had guarded beneath competence for years. She tightened her fingers around his. "And I love you, Leopold, not because you are a duke, but because you learned that trust must sometimes come before certainty." She rose onto her toes and kissed him. He received the kiss without urgency, holding her hand as though it were not proof of possession, but a choice renewed between them. When they drew apart, Keldon Hall stood behind them, no longer silent from fear. By the end of July, Keldon Hall no longer required Adelaide to stand beneath every bell in order to remain orderly. That change proved more difficult for her than exposing the mechanism had been. She had spent years believing that vigilance was the rent a useful woman paid for safety. Now Mrs. Priest chaired the morning linen count. Mr. Hollis directed formal service without consulting Adelaide over every tray, and a new clerk of works was chosen only after Mr. Latham examined references from 3 estates and spoke personally with 2 former employers. The man selected, Mr. Nathaniel Grove, arrived with no mysterious estimates, no private understanding with guests, and no objection to keeping witnessed records. Adelaide watched the household continue through an entire afternoon while she sat beneath the cedar on the west lawn with an unopened book. No servant came running, no pointer struck without cause, nothing collapsed because she rested. Leopold found her there after a chaperoned call from his widowed aunt had ended. Their courtship had been proper from the first day. He called at appointed hours. They walked where gardeners and servants remained within sight. He never confused access with entitlement. Sometimes they discussed estate matters. Sometimes they spoke of nothing more serious than whether Yorkshire rain possessed a personal grudge against summer picnics. On that afternoon, he sat on the opposite side of the stone bench and glanced at the closed book. "You haven't turned a page. I am practicing idleness. You look alarmingly industrious about it." Adelaide smiled. Old habits resist dismissal. Then perhaps they need an honest character and a carriage away from Keldon. That would only send them into another household. He laughed, then grew quieter. "Mrs. Priest says the servants' hall manage luncheon without consulting you. She sounded almost offended by my survival. Are you? Offended? Relieved?" Adelaide looked toward the house. Sunlight lay across its long windows. The service passages within were no longer ruled by panic, yet she still felt the pull to rise whenever a door opened. "I am learning," she said. That is not the same as being relieved. Leopold did not offer reassurance too quickly. He had learned that comfort could become another way of refusing the truth. Then learn at your own pace, he said. The house can wait. Their first disagreement came in August. Leopold proposed enlarging the household office and placing Adelaide's name over its door after their marriage. He meant it as honor. She heard obligation. You would make the room larger, she said, standing beside the plans in the library, and still expect me to occupy it. I thought you might wish to retain oversight. Oversight is another word for responsibility when spoken by the person who does not carry it. He looked down at the plans. That was not my intention. No, but intention does not shorten the working day. Once, he might have defended the generosity of the offer. Instead, he folded the plan closed. Then the office remains Mrs. Preece's. Adelaide watched him. You are not angry. I am disappointed that I misunderstood what would please you. I am not entitled to punish you for correcting me. The answer moved her more deeply than easy agreement would have done. She crossed the space between them and took his hand. I do want a place in the house, she said, but not one that exists because everyone else may rest while I remain necessary. Then we shall find the place together. The marriage settlement reflected that promise. Mr. Latham drew terms protecting Adelaide's personal property and establishing an independent jointure. Nothing required her to serve as unpaid housekeeper, estate secretary, or permanent guardian of every domestic crisis. Leopold asked her to read each provision. She changed too. He accepted both without argument. When the banns were read in the parish church on 3 successive Sundays, whispers followed, as whispers always did. Some called Adelaide fortunate. Others called the match surprising. No one who had stood in the service courtyard mistook fortune for the whole of it. On the 20th of September, Adelaide entered the Keldon chapel wearing ivory silk without jewels beyond a small brooch that had belonged to her mother. The cherrywood needle case remained in her dressing room, safe inside the reticule she had carried on her first day. She did not need it at the altar. Nothing there required mending. Leopold waited before the chaplain without impatience. When Adelaide reached him, he offered his hand rather than taking hers. She placed her fingers in his freely. The vows were spoken clearly. No scandal interrupted them. No hidden bell rang. When the chaplain named her Duchess of Keldon, Adelaide felt no transformation into someone more valuable than the woman who had entered through the servant's door. 5 months earlier, the title altered her place in society. It did not create her worth. Leopold seemed to understand. After the register was signed, he bent close enough for only her to hear. You are still Adelaide, and you are still learning, she whispered. I had hoped marriage might grant immediate wisdom. It grants witnesses. His laughter followed them into the autumn light. 9 days later, the servants' hall was prepared for Michaelmas supper. Roast goose filled the lower rooms with warmth and spice. Apples shone in earthen dishes. The long table held no ducal silver, only polished household plate and linen chosen for use rather than display. Adelaide entered with Leopold after the first course had been served. Mrs. Preece stood at the head of the table in her new authority as permanent housekeeper. Hollis occupied his proper place. Thomas and Clara sat among the senior servants. Nell Dyer, no longer frightened by every sudden sound, carried bread with steady hands. Adelaide and Leopold did not take the highest chairs. They remained only long enough to thank the household. This supper belongs to you, Adelaide said. So does the credit for the house continuing when no single person stands at its center. Mrs. Priest's eyes brightened, though her reply remained practical. It continues better when people leave written instructions. Hollis lifted his glass, and when certain guests are prevented from writing any. Laughter moved along the table. It was not nervous laughter. No one checked the door afterward. As Adelaide turned to leave, she noticed a loose thread at Leopold's cuff. The sight awakened an instinct older than Keldon. She drew the cherrywood needle case from her reticule and opened it beneath the passage lamp. The carved swallow rested against her palm. "Hold still," she said. Leopold extended his wrist obediently. "Must everything still be repaired by your hand?" Adelaide threaded the needle. "Not everything." She secured the cuff with 3 small stitches, then bit the thread clean. "A home should be able to continue when one person rests. And may that person occasionally be you. Occasionally. I shall consider that a binding promise." She closed the case and placed it on the household table beside the supper accounts, not hidden, not displayed beneath glass, merely present, among useful things. Beyond the passage, the bellboard stood restored to its ordinary purpose. The false crank had gone into the magistrate's custody months before. Each cord hung straight. Each ivory pointer remained still. A maid carried a written request from the drawing room and handed it calmly to Mrs. Priest. No one ran, no one flinched. Leopold offered Adelaide his hand. She took it. They walked into the quiet courtyard where early autumn stars had begun to appear above the roofline. "I love you," he said, as naturally as if the words had become part of the house. Adelaide turned toward him. "And I love you." She touched his face and kissed him slowly and without an audience. His arms came around her only after she moved closer. When they parted, their hands remained joined. Behind them, Michaelmas laughter rose from the servants' hall. The needle case rested closed upon the table. The bell cords hung in perfect order. No pointer moved. For the first time in Leopold's memory, silence at Keldon Hall did not mean someone was afraid. It meant everyone was home.